Good morning, students. I hope you have understood my previous sessions. Today we will start with the next topic, that is the Indian Independence Act of 1947, which was the last legislation of the British government. The previous act, the 1935 Act, also was a failure, though they specified that they recommended that there shall be provincial autonomy, there shall be diarchy, there shall be dual government, there shall be a federation, there will be 3 lists. All this was only recommendations but not completely implemented. Hence, this Act of 1935 was a failure. Now, the last legislation of the British government before independence was called the Indian Independence Act of 1947. In the year 1939, the Congress, that is the Indian National Congress, reinstated, or they reiterated their demand for the formation of a constituent assembly so that they can frame a constitution for free India. But this demand was not fulfilled. During that time, the Second World War started to erupt in different places. When this happened, the British government realized the importance of India because Japan also had entered the Second World War. And Sir Stafford Cripps was sent by the British government to convince the Indians, since Japan also had entered war. Now, at that time, Cripps came in and he proposed formation of constituent assembly and dominion status to India. Now, just because of the Second World War, the British government realized that they have to give provisions to the Indians so that much before they get their independence, they can have or they can form a constituent assembly which will frame a constitution for them. At the same time, they agreed to give them dominion status, which will be done after the war, But this was not accepted by the Indian National Congress, neither the Muslim League. So both of them refused it. At that time, they realized that they have to make certain other more changes, and they brought in the Wavell Plan. In this Wavell Plan, they said that there shall be a reconstituting of the Executive Council of the Governor General with equal seats for Muslims as well as the Hindus. That is, there will be Muslims and the Hindus will be given equal number of seats, wherein in the Executive Council of the Governor General. That means earlier these people were not placed there. Now, when this was said, again Jinnah declined it. Though Indian National Congress agreed for it, they accepted it, whereas Jinnah declined it because he was very, very clear that he wanted a separate Pakistan where Muslims will be there. During that period, in England, elections took place, and in that elections, the Labour Party won. In the elections in England, the Labour Party won, and in the Labour Party, the person who won the elections was Clement Attlee, and he became the Prime Minister. When he became the Prime Minister, it was he who decided that he also specifically said Indians have a right to form a constituent assembly and frame a constitution much before independence. So he realized the value of providing the Indians the freedom to form a constituent assembly and then to frame a constitution. This was an earnest decision by Attlee to solve the problem of the Indians. They sent the cabinet mission. Later on, they sent the cabinet mission. That is, they proposed for a formation of constituent assembly with 389 members. That is, again, another thing what they suggested was formation of an interim government with support of all the political parties. That is, an interim government is only as an interval. For the interval period, there will be a small temporary government. Third, formation of Union of India. All the states of British India as well as the Indian states had to come together and form the Union of India. And the next suggestion was the formation of Pakistan, which was not desirable at all. That time, when these suggestions were made, it was in 1947 that they suggested that there shall be a constituent assembly. And this constituent assembly will be headed by Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the president. And then they also set up a drafting committee in the year 1947 itself, was set up by the Constituent Assembly, and this drafting committee will be headed by Dr. Ambedkar as its chairman. The Congress, that is the Indian National Congress, accepted this proposal, but the Muslim League rejected this proposal. And from the next day itself, there was so much of communal riots that there was so much of hunky-dory in the whole state or the whole nation. It was at this time that Clement Attlee declared that transfer of power will take place. That is, transfer of power from British to the Indian government will take place on 20th February 1947. And at the same time, the British government also said that they will be sending Lord Mountbatten, who will do the transfer of power. Lord Mountbatten came into India. He conducted a lot of meetings and discussions with the political leaders of India. Some of the things were compromised, some were not possible to compromise, but they had to have a united India. Some compromises took place, some was not possible. And finally, they had to agree, that is, the Indian National Congress had to agree for a partition. And actually, this Independence Act of 1947 is only an extension of the Lord Mountbatten plan. The provisions of the Indian Independence Act are as follows. The Act provided for two independent dominions, that is India and Pakistan. They also specified transfer of power will take place, and the Act also has provided that power will be transferred from the British government to two independent nations, India as well as Pakistan. Here they said, India shall have the following territories: Bombay, Madras, Uttar Pradesh, Central Province, Bihar, East Punjab, West Bengal, Assam, Delhi, Ajmer and Coorg, and all the other states of India, except those few states which have gone to Pakistan, that is Sindh, Balochistan, West Punjab, East Bengal, Northwest Frontier Province, Sylhet in Assam. This belongs to Pakistan. After this, they set up a boundary commission, because the boundary had to be marked, the demarcation has to take place and separate India as well as Pakistan. And this boundary commission was headed by Sir Cyril Radcliffe as its chairman. Another provision what it made was, the Crown was no longer the source of authority. Britain government or the British government had no more authority over the Indians. And the next proposed was, office of the Secretary of the State was abolished. The Secretary's office no more existed, it was completely removed. The next point is, the Governor General and the provincial governors were to act as constitutional heads, but they lost all their extraordinary legislation powers. They were supposed to work only as constitutional heads. Next point, from 15th August 1947, the British Crown loses all its rights of paramountcy. Paramountcy meaning supremacy of the British Crown, because the Indian states were asked to either join India or Pakistan as per their will, because there was no force. Next point is, Constituent Assembly had a dual role. Constituent Assembly was to be framed, and this Constituent Assembly had to make laws, that is the legislative principles. At the same time, it also had to make the constitution. So it had to play a dual role of both constituent as well as legislative. It was functioned, or it was supposed to work as a central legislature. It was all in one. Next, 8th point, until the new constitution was framed, the 1935 Act will govern the center and the provinces with certain modifications, as long as the Constituent Assembly will take to make the constitution. This 1935 Act will be in practice, and whatever they do, it will be with certain modifications, whatever is required. After this Act was passed, India and Pakistan became two free nations. Independence of India was a very great event because it was in the largest democracy. Indian National Congress had to concede, had to agree for the partition unwillingly. They were not happy with it. But Jinnah was very adamant, and Jinnah accepted the truncated Pakistan, which he had refused earlier. He had rejected it earlier, truncated in the sense which was tipped off, which was shortened. So the Pakistan, Jinnah accepted the truncated Pakistan for as long as it was independent and completely separate from India. If not, Jinnah had not accepted this, then we would not have got independence, or it would have been more prolonged. Independence would not have come in at all. So Pakistan and India separation was indispensable for us. This was a prized freedom. This was achieved with lot of difficulty. There was utter gloom. There was so much of upset issues. There was so much of tragic activities. There was so much of sadness that the Indian government had to come out free from all this. The partition was a big sad event for India, but ultimately the new free India emerged. Now, on 26th September 1946, an interim government was formed. An interim government, that is, as long as in that interval period till the date of independence, that is 15th August 1947, till that much of period, there will be an interim government, a small short government, which will be set up by the Constituent Assembly, which will consist of 389 members. This interim government will assist India and Pakistan in the transition of the British rights, that is, whatever transition from the British Crown has to happen will be assisted by this Constituent Assembly in the way of an interim government. This transition will take place. There was the Viceroy's Executive Council, which was later on transformed into the Council of Ministers. In this Viceroy's Executive Council, we had the Vice President as Jawaharlal Nehru. And this Vice President himself was again appointed as the head of the Council of Ministers, and he became the Prime Minister of India. And he was assisted by 15 other members. They were Vallabhbhai Patel, who was the Deputy Prime Minister as well as the Home Minister. Then it was Dr. Ambedkar, who was the Law Minister. Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad became the Education Minister. Then you have C.H. Baba, who was in charge of Commerce. Gadgil, who was Minister for Power, Mines and Power. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur took care of the Health Department. Rafi Ahmad Kidwai took care of Communications. John Mathai took care of Railways. Shyam Prasad, Jagjeevan Ram, Shanmugam Chetty, Sardar Baldev Singh, P. Deshmukh K.C. Nyoji, Gopal Swami Iyengar, all of them were given certain other important posts. During this period, after this, India was under the control of British earlier. Now, after independence, it had to take up all the complete responsibility, and this interim government, not keeping quiet, much before independence itself, they started to have or continue with the good relations with other nations, including USA. On 26th November 1949, the constitution was completed. India accepted the new constitution. On 26th January 1950, the constitution came into effect. Based on these provisions, the first general elections was to be conducted. And on 26th January 1950, when India became a sovereign democratic republic, as soon as the Indian constitution was accepted, the first general elections was conducted. That was from 1951 to February 1952. And they also specified that there shall be universal adult franchise. A new India became the world's largest democracy. Now, with independence and with the first general elections coming in, the Indian constitution framers had realized that this would be the largest democracy, and the framers had faith not only on the democracy, but they had faith on mankind. Hence, they suggested general elections, and this became the biggest political democracy which conducted elections. And these elections had a few special provisions. The biggest political experiment was conducted for India, that is the largest Indian democracy. There were 489 seats in the Lok Sabha, and for that there were 176 million electorate. 105.5 million people actually voted. 2,24,000 polling booths were there. 45% of votes were polled. 70 political parties existed that time itself, and there were 1,800 candidates. Now, there were certain facts, like the Congress emerged as the popular political party, and they won 74.5% of the seats in the Lok Sabha. People in India, though they were poor, illiterate, superstitious, but they had political consciousness. They had the value of vote. The communists were popular in Hyderabad, Travancore, Cochin, Tamil Nadu, and West Bengal. Voting in the rural areas was 60%, whereas in the towns it was only 40%. Elections were conducted very, very peacefully, which was a notable one, which was an encouraging fact for a large country like India. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was defeated in these elections by a small-time party worker, Kajrolkar of Bombay. This was, though he was a scheduled caste leader, though he was the chairman of the drafting committee, this was one setback for him. There is no relationship between any percentage of vote secured by the party and the number of seats won by it. Now, after the elections, the first Lok Sabha consisted of 491 seats, as we had mentioned. In that 491, 489 seats were elected, and 2 seats were nominated for 2 Anglo-Indians, hence 491 seats. The first speaker of the Indian Independent Lok Sabha was G.V. Mavalankar. There were 14 sessions held, which was the largest. And in these 14 sessions, 667 days of sittings had taken place. That means 3,784 hours, which meant highest record of sittings in the Lok Sabha. this government completed its full term of 5 years. That is from 17th April to 4th April 1957. Hence, our Indian independent government, which the first government completed its full term with the leadership of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you, students.